And hello there, this is DrIzixs with another episode of Minecraft, the Banana Viking Server, and this is going to be a weird episode for two reasons. First off, I'm actually recording the audio when I'm not actually playing Minecraft. I'm using the Minecraft footage as B-roll, as I think it's called, where there's footage that you guys can watch while I talk about some stuff. Mainly so I can have some more proper notes in front of me so I don't forget important things. Because I'm going to tackle something a little on the crazier side of things as far as, what I talk about on my Minecraft videos even. So, yeah, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Let's talk a little bit about that. Yeah, this is going to be straightforward, isn't it? So, for those who are unaware, there's a country in the Middle East called Israel. Israel was formed around 1948, I think it is. And it was basically designed as a post-World War sort of answers. Okay, people have been kind of really awful to the Jews and things like that, so let's kind of give them their own country and hope for the best. That's a very simplified version of what's all I'm talking about here, but it is kind of how a lot of the Western world sort of has operated with it, especially early on. And so, there's the whole UN mandate, and then there was a war that sort of rearranged the borders after what they were supposed to be originally, the Arab-Israeli War in 1948. And then there was, some conflicts later, I think in the 60s it was, probably. So that again rearranged the borders. I think it was the 6-Day War. So after the formation Arab-Israeli War in 48, Israel had certain borders. The rest of the territory that had been the Palestine mandate, British mandate, was sort of divided up between Israel and some of the countries surrounding it, specifically Jordan, Egypt, and Syria. So Syria had a bit of territory in the Golan Heights. Jordan had the West Bank under its control, and Egypt was also in control to control the Gaza Strip. So you got the Israeli folks, predominantly Jews, sort of dominating the Israeli portion, and the Palestinians, in the other bits, and also the Palestinians had living in what's now Israel were kind of pushed out. And a lot of them moved to the West Bank or Gaza or somewhere else, and some of them have been in refugee camps in places like Lebanon, basically ever since. And so that really kind of sucks for them. So that's kind of how things got to a certain degree. Now there was also a agreement between Israel and Egypt. So during the 6-Day War, Israel also took, I need to back up. So the 6-Day War had several countries surrounding Israel basically go to war against Israel. Israel was able to push them back and was actually managed to occupy some of the territories surrounding it, specifically the Golan Heights, West Bank, Gaza Strip, also the Sinai Peninsula. In the early 80s, Israel and Egypt sort of made or late 70s, early 80s, I forget exactly when, made an agreement to return the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt, because Egypt's like, hey, that's ours. The Gaza Strip we don't really care about, but the Sinai, that's like actually ours, so give it back. So they did, and so that's kind of how you get to the current status quo of there being the State of Israel, as well as the occupied territories. And depending on who you talk to, those territories are either integral parts of Israel, they are occupied territories, they are Palestine, they are the specific elements called the Gaza West Bank and Golan Heights. Syria still has a firm claim on the Golan Heights. Israel doesn't really go anywhere there. It's also kind of the least interesting as far as conflict zones here. Besides, Syria is really distracted right now and whatever. Meanwhile, Jordan and Egypt are like, we don't really care about these places anymore. We're worried about other things at the moment, so we'll maybe give lip service to the plight of Palestinians occasionally, but we're just kind of ignore the situation when convenient. So there's also a history of intifadas, this, that, the other thing, And so I'm going to be skipping a whole lot of complicated history here and saying, all right, so you effectively, as far as stuff that is actually happening in the very more present day, like this year, as in perhaps even like this very day as this video is going up, there is effectively 3 main players in Israel-Palestinian land place here. So I'm going to basically from here on out call Israel proper, not including the West Bank and Gaza Strip, as Israel. I'm going to call the West Bank area the West Bank and Gaza Strip, Gaza Strip. Now, who you personally view should be in control of each of these, I kind of don't care. So I'm going to go ahead and be calling these things. And if you want to cool about what they should be called technically, feel free to make a comment. But me having various, inline corrections every single time I want to mention these territories isn't helpful and just going to be wasting everyone's time. So I'm just going to skip all of that and just call them by these particular sort of elements here. So you got presently the government of Israel, you got the Palestinian Authority, and you got basically those are the 2 main players. Now, even inside the Palestinian Authority, you kind of have 2 blocks of power that are very much separated between the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. Now, the Gaza Strip is dominated by Hamas. Now, Hamas is one of those organizations that is fairly militant, so they do go out and try to, do military strikes against Israel and all that sort of stuff. So I'm not saying that they are angels or anything like that. But I will point out that they are also the de facto power in the Gaza Strip. And so if anyone wants to sort of interact with the Gaza Strip in a meaningful fashion, they are kind of the people to talk to. In the West Bank, you just got the Palestinian Authority. I think and they've got mostly more direct influence there. Also, they've kind of stopped having elections because they fear they would lose to Hamas. So, because, the Palestinian Authority elections would involve both Gaza and the West Bank, and Hamas, for, all the trouble they make, is still fairly popular because they're actually doing things. So, the Palestinian Authority has kind of just like, boss here is going to be like, I'm just going to be kind of president until things change. And so he's kind of the person to talk to in his party and organization is who to talk to in the West Bank. In Israel proper, they recently had a change of government. For quite some time now, they had the government under Benjamin Netanyahu, who is the lead person for the Likud party prime minister. Now, Israel also has a president, but they're not super important. As far as policy is concerned, it's pretty much the prime minister and parliament there. Now, the Likud party has been predominantly dominating Israeli politics since the late 70s. Before that, it was more labor, more left-wing sort of governments there. And then Likud took over in the late 70s. There's been a couple points for a couple years. Labor parties of various sorts have been back in power. There's also a period where the former Likud Prime Minister Sharon started a new party, and they were in party for a few years until Likud took back. And just very, very, very recently, recent elections meant formation of a new government, and Likud had 30 seats in parliament out of 120, I think it is. So they had a quarter of the seats, and were also the party with the most seats, but they're unable to get anyone to actually work with them because of various reasons involving internal Israeli politics, some of which I understand, say, the whole corruption, investigations and trials with Netanyahu specifically, was kind of making them unpopular with everyone else, including people and parties with similar ideological sort of positioning. And that just like, we don't want to be associated with these guys because they kind of suck. Like, we agree with them on policy, but as far as actually running the government, they're not that good. So we want to make a coalition with anyone else. So presently, you got a new prime minister coming in who has is has been put into power due to an agreement with a centrist party, which is actually the leader of the coalition, that centrist party. But the new prime minister for at least next couple of years is actually from a fairly right-wing party that, and so they kind of average out to being very similarly, together, being similarly ideologically similar to Likud as far as the actual makeup of their members, but they have more extremes, I guess. If you can say far right and centrist as extremes. So that's kind of and so you got, as far as this point forward, a new government in charge that, if that's who you're going to have to talk to as far as that goes. So anyway, all of this background now sort of here, let's talk about what's actually been going on, I guess most recently. Now, one could talk about various historical claims to the territories, and some of them are kind of relevant. Others are very irrelevant. There's also specifically, sort of religious claims being made. I tend to discount them because really, this may be a little flippant, but there are plenty of people that make religious claims that they should be in charge of X, Y, or Z, or enforcing their will on various groups of people for whatever reason. And I generally disagree with those because they are inevitably going to be acting in a way that is, let's put it straightforward, anti-democratic. These are, fiat rules being laid down that are preventing folks from being able to be self-determining in how their government runs. So I'm going to not be playing into that sort of stuff, but I will say that as far as stuff has been going on very recently, let's look at those and maybe offer up some suggestions on what to do. Also, kind of point out that there's a lot of bad actors on various points, and also maybe lay out a little bit where my actual personal leanings are on this. Now, let's actually start with that bad actors stuff. So Netanyahu, he's kind of a corrupt son of a bitch. And he's his party, the Likud party, is fairly right wing. So you might expect me to say that sort of thing about right wing parties in general. But I tend to prefer to actually have like some examples of what I'm talking about here. So I already mentioned this, the investigation, things like that have been going on here, and a fair bit of that sort of thing there. I was going to say something else. I'm trying to remember what it was. Anywho, I'll moving on. So he's been and his party have been the driving force in a lot of recent stuff in as far as the conflict between the Palestinians and Israelis. Yes, there are rocket attacks coming on against Israel, especially from Gaza, but there has also been very much a disproportionate counterattack that for when there's maybe a dozen people in all of Israel who are killed in a massive rocket campaign out of Gaza, the Israeli response has been a massive bombing campaign that has killed hundreds of people. So there is very much a problem of disproportionate response going on here, and that's generally uncool in my book. Yes, there could be you may be victims of war crimes yourself, but that doesn't really give you permission to commit them yourself as well. So doing one-upping like this, generally not cool here, especially since it's only bombings and not really any actual attempt to solve the problem. If all you're going to be doing is trying to hurt people without actually figuring out how to make this conflict come to an actual end, then what are you doing? Now, an idea for that, and this is kind of a common idea that I see in a lot of, in basically the three major players I already talked about. that it is useful to have an enemy, an opponent, to focus the people's ire on, so they don't necessarily question your leadership. This is a awful situation generally, because it means that as long as people are, riled up and going rah down with the bad guys here, that the people in charge can kind of get away with whatever they like, and that tends to lead to corrupt governments. It leads to degradations of democracies, and long term, it generally leads to dictatorship. Honestly, one of the key pinnings of Donald Trump's sort of whole administration was making enemies and riling up his base to target them. Those enemies were varied, but even on the right in American politics, there is a large amount of folks that have different things that they're concerned about, and sure, you can sort of try to link them all together, but unless you have a sort of rallying sort of effort there, you are going to have a bunch of disparate folks just kind of blaming different groups. But if you can sort of try to unify that hate into a general coalition of vagueness that you're in opposition to, even if even if that vagueness is still a vagueness, you can definitely work to try to entrench your power, and thus you don't necessarily have to do anything other than keep people hating, as far as actually serving as a functional government. And the Trump government kind of sucked. I don't know if anyone remembers, but we kind of lost 500,000 people to a virus this past year, and that's really awful. And it didn't have to fucking be that way. I don't drop many F-bombs here, but I feel I got to for this particular case here. Governments that base their entire policy over hating someone else, that's kind of how they're operating and why they're operating. And so the Netanyahu government is very much in that mold there. Instead of doing anything productive to try to solve the problem, just keep poking it. The settlers moving into the West Bank, kicking out people out of their homes, take their land. Yeah, we'll keep that doing, because that'll make sure that people in Gaza keep firing rockets. And when they fire rockets, we should give a good show of bombing them to hell, and the people will be like, yeah, you're doing the right thing here, because they for reals attacked us, even though they were properly provoked. Yeah. Meanwhile, you got Hamas, who also aren't being very useful in all of this, because they're walking right into the provocation. Now, I'm not trying to excuse the ridiculousness that the Israelis are doing in the West Bank, basically seizing people's lands and kicking the Palestinians who have been living there for decades or centuries even from out of their homes, because that is very much wrong. But it is, if your only response is a half-assed series of rocket attacks, that most of your rockets get shot down anyway because Israel's expecting it. This is a really dumb way to fight a war? Yeah, but it is. But because you're shooting off your rockets and then are occasionally hitting targets, you are able to say, yeah, we're doing something. We're fighting the good fight. We are engaged in a military response to the unchecked aggression. Our enemy is, the worst thing ever, and we're gonna rah that to maximize our support here locally. Now, then you got Abbas and the Palestinian Authority, once again dominate the West Bank, and they're like, we can kind of use both Israel and Hamas as our enemies. We're gonna be less militant about it, but we're not gonna really complain too much when they bomb each other, so And Abbas also is very much he doesn't necessarily have to be as actively aggressive with his activities there, but he's definitely also not doing much in terms of trying to solve this whole conflict here. I know it's kind of hard to try to do anything, and then, when you got multiple parties, involved who are happy to sort of attack each other willy-nilly like that, but still, there's more you could be doing here. So there's a lot of lack of will by the powers that have been in charge for quite some time here to try to fix anything. And I will happily condemn anyone involved in the conflict who is eager, willing, and actively making it harder to have a peaceful settlement. Because at the end of the day, there's a lot of people in Palestine, the Palestinian territories of Gaza and West Bank, as well as lots of good people in Israel who are like, no, this is awful. This is just the worst here. This is bad. Could you guys stop this? And they're kind of caught in the crossfire here. And, there's innocent people here that are being harmed, and that's not acceptable in my book. So there is a... So I guess at the end of the day, if I have to be the champion for any particular side, I champion the folks that are innocent in all this, and they're the ones that also have the least voice in what's going on as well. Now there are folks that that are quite justified in their actions, be they violent or not, that are effectively doing the right thing. And unfortunately, there's so much difficulty getting good information that it's also hard to figure out remotely who those folks are, because a lot of the time, especially in the West, our media presentation of what's happening in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is very much slanted, very often the Israeli favor, and it's hard to make informed decisions there. So there is very much a case of, I want to do the right thing, and sometimes when I start to look at things like, what these folks are doing here is maybe not what I'd be doing, but I guess I could understand what they're doing. To quote Mr. Spock there, I understand, but I might not necessarily approve. That's not quite what he said, but it's close enough. So I understand a lot of why things are happening, but there is also maybe an opportunity, I guess. So there's a lot of badness here. There is also a certain amount of baked-in propaganda into this, communities and societies here that, I've seen multiple videos before of, folks being interviewed on the streets in Israel. It's like, oh yeah, it would be great to just kill all the Palestinians, and we're not going to, be self-aware at all about the fact that that's fucking genocide. So yeah, that's kind of awful there, but there's also folks that are on the street not getting interviewed and giving those ridiculous answers. So now I will, once again, happily condemn folks that are, pro-genocide, and I'll try to uplift the voices of folks who are, anti-genocide, that are like, maybe let's, come to a peaceful agreement. Now, that said, peace on its own at the end of the day isn't necessarily justice. Now, so peace is a good first step, but in the long run, we do need that as well, and hopefully also the democracy stuff I was talking about. And for all the talk about Israel being the bastion of democracy in the Middle East, which I've been hearing for decades now, it kind of sucks at it. Now, I didn't say before that Likud has been predominantly in control since the late 70s now, and with a few exceptions to that, including most recently here. But as far as democracy goes, Israel definitely does have a problem in being a good democracy, in both the technical sense, because a lot of their governments have been kind of wonky with so many parties that are very bad at governing and letting over and over again, a party that doesn't even represent a good faction of this of the country, dominate from time to time, and other times letting that same party dominate because it actually does have the support of a good chunk of the country, and so it's kind of it has a lot of problems as far as the basic functionality goes there, which happens in a number of parliamentary democracies, but the specific solutions I would have for that are kind of beyond the scope of this discussion right here. It's also bad in the, being a good democracy for all the people that live in the territory that it says it wants to rule over. Because if folks in Israel said that, okay, we're going to have a one-state situation, then you need to give citizenship and voting rights to everyone in those territories. And this notion that Israel is only for Jewish people kind of needs to go out the window. Because there are people living in Israel, West Bank, and Gaza Strip who maybe don't want to be Jewish. Because they're not. And the same thing goes for, basically, any sort of situation like this where, someone's trying to make a religious, ethnic, or whatever sort of state that you need to be okay with people who are not whatever you are living in your country, because alternatively you would have to remove them. And that once again goes to that genocide thing. Genocide does include expelling people from their homes, and basically destroying their way of life. It's not just murdering of people here. So that's the thing that's also not good. So in order to avoid that particular sort of outcome, Israel, was established as a Jewish state, and that's fine. But that it's also not the 1940s anymore, where we're very much that was kind of needed for there to be an escape valve for folks, fleeing that whole Holocaust thing in Europe. But things have changed, and we as a society kind of understand better how people form governments, how people interact with each other, and what also leads to general awfulness as far as not terrible outcomes for folks. And so we definitely need to be in a position where Israel needs to pick if it's going to be a democracy or a Jewish state. And in the long run, it can kind of only be one of those, especially if it's, if you're going to be going the one-state solution. If you go the two-state solution, then you can be a bit more stringent and find a balance between democracy, both democracy and Jewish state, and just kind of let the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza Strip live their lives and be there. And, this also requires you to stop kicking them off their land in the West Bank, guys. Hint, hint, hint. So, hope that made sense. I probably screwed up something there, in which case I'll apologize later, but I'm tired of, this is my second take of this. My first one got really incoherent because I was trying to go into a lot of the very specifics of Zionism, which is a little hard to do since I'm not really steeped in the philosophical background there, other than the basics of Zionism generally is about creating a place for Jewish folks to have a homeland, generally in the Middle East, generally in this bit of territory. There's, various branches, some of them more religious, some of them more militant, some of them are like, ready to go and be like farmers, man, and have an agrarian society, and that's just going to solve all our problems. So yeah, there's a lot sort of to deep dive there. I guess, long story short, I'm not Jewish, so I don't really have a good position as far as different schools of Zionism goes, but I definitely have the some of the questions that the post-Zionists pose that is so Israel now has existed, and it's going to likely going to exist for here on out, unless some really wacky large-scale change happens. So it's not fear of Israel not existing shouldn't really be driving politics anymore. So why is it? Yeah, because that's a little confusing. Once again, there's a little bit disproportionate response here in as far as the capabilities of those that are being, actually aggressive to Israel, and those that, and Israel proper there. So it is a little weird that there's still all this militantism, being pushed by some folks. Also, I would also be tempted to say I would also have some leanings of anti-Zionism, but I wouldn't go so far as to be fully into that camp either. I do also want to point out that anti-Zionism is not the same thing as anti-Semitism, though there are plenty of people who like to conflate the two in order to make themselves look better. Because if you can basically say, oh, obviously anyone who disagrees with me is, a racist son of a bitch, it kind of, it's one of those ad hominem attacks, and especially in this case, it's definitely not grounded in reality. Because having doubts about the long-term functionality of any religious-centric state, just in general, should not be equated to, oh, that means you're, anti this religion. No, I'm anti-religious states, be it just in name, just in, or more in policy, or it's actually rolled by a whole elite or whatever. I'm generally against those on principle, and being sort of against that idea in this particular case does not mean I'm against that specific religion. I'm against this for all religions, honestly. So basically, both folks that make that claim are a little off base. So I do want to make sure that there's a separation between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism is basically being anti-Jewish. Meanwhile, being anti-Zionism is just being in opposition to the ideology of Zionism there. So there's a bit of a difference there. And yeah, so those who equate the two, no, they're full of crap. So I should also point out that even in ideologies I tend to be more familiar with, the totality of it is rarely 100% what I'm about, even for for stuff that I am generally about. So saying that I am 100% any of these things, especially when I once again not steeped fully in the ideology and thinking and history and culture connections, is also kind of hard for me to sort of vibe with. So I don't necessarily want to stake a firm ideological position here. I will say what my practical position is. And that practical position is, once again, there are innocent people that get hurt in these fights, and it is unfair that the governments, powers, groups, whatever, that are involved in this conflict are happy to perpetuate this conflict in order to preserve their own personal power at the expense of these innocent people. So, moving forward from this point on, what do I think should happen? Well, it'll be nice to have a whole clearinghouse of everyone who sucks, as far as, people in charge. That's probably not going to happen, so here is my free advice for the various parties to figure out their crap. So we'll start with the boss, because he's kind of the third wheel in the situation as far as current events goes. And his best option is to basically approach Israel and is like, hey, so we both kind of think Hamas sucks. Like, they're kind of a threat to my power, and that also we don't want them to basically make things worse for us in the West Bank, even though you keep doing that too. But maybe if you want to, team up in a sort of way and solve this whole problem for the long-term Israel, we could maybe figure out a deal where either, we work together to undermine Hamas in a very substantial manner, or you, Israel, as the so-called beacon of democracy in the Middle East, actually help us transition to a functional Palestinian democracy on our end that actually has protections and that you will go to bat for so that, there isn't going to be basically what we've been doing for a while now. And so you'll and so we'll both get hailed as heroes for reforming things. And in exchange, you stop moving settlers to the West Bank and kind of let us do our own thing. And I know the new prime minister who's coming in probably isn't going to vibe with that, but, put the feelers out there to maybe make this a thing. And all else fails, if he's going to say no, then it's like, oh, well, we tried to do the right thing. Hey, international community, put some pressure on them? No? That sucks. But at least that's the thing to try. On the Israeli side, the thing I'd be doing is, one, ending the settlement of the West Bank. Because, once again, kicking people out of their homes is not cool, guys. I know that's been sort of a historical thing that Israel's done for a while, but maybe stop. Yeah. Also, you don't necessarily have to bomb the crap out of the Gaza Strip, in such a disproportionate manner. Yeah, sure, you occasionally kill Hamas leaders, but there's a lot of people in the Gaza Strip there. There's like 2 million people in an area like the size of Philadelphia. So that's a pretty dense territory there, and that's also a lot. And there's a lot of people there, and it's very much going to be a case of, okay, you kill a commander. There's like 50 guys who want that job too. Sure, they're probably going to get killed by you soon enough, but we're talking about people that are, very, on board the, let's harm Israel train here. So you're just going to keep, revolving door, new guy, same as the old guy sort of situation forever, unless you decide to actually do something here. And what that thing to do is to undermine Hamas's ability to keep people under their sway. You don't do that by basically proving Hamas right that Israel is an unreasonable aggressor. Yeah, that's not how you do that. Now, let's say, for some weird reason, I was giving Hamas advice. It would be kind of a similar thing, that you need to basically win the propaganda war to a certain degree, not the one to keep you in power, but the one to actually solve the conflict in total. And that would be to, not instantly demilitarize whatever, because I understand that wouldn't fly with your folks, whatever. But it would be to, I guess, retool, because the way you fight your war is not very smart. I mentioned before, Israel tends to knock down most of your rockets, right? So, yeah, you're not really winning this on the military sort of front here, so what's the point? You're making a lot of noise for a lot of fury, but your effectiveness, it isn't going to help you at all. And you're just hurting your own people as a result. So, yeah, that's... So chill a bit. If you need to give the true believers an excuse of why you're sort of pulling back a bit, it's like, yeah, we're preparing for the real conflict, guys. Wink. And if you want to actually have a military fight sometime down the road, rethink your strategy. Come to and I don't know, figure out some other way to wage it, because how it's rolling here isn't going to go anywhere. You're too rigid, guys. Your tactics suck. Strategy doesn't make any sense. Can't blame you for trying to do something here, but, it'd be nice if it was something that would actually work. So you're not going to win the military side. Shorter version of all that. You basically, if you want to be in charge of the Palestinian Authority in total, and actually have the Palestinian Authority, functional, say, hey, Israel, Abbas kind of sucks, doesn't he? He's not, we think he sucks. You kind of discredit, don't really care about him and such, but, if we could cease fire and actually cease fire, and we'll actually cease fire, and you, for realsies, actually cease fire, maybe we could work together. I know you don't want to do it officially, whatever, because, we've been the bad guys for how many, numbers of decades now, but you can definitely, we'll we'll figure out a way to basically do what I offered up for a boss there, to help the Gaza Strip and West Bank transition to full Palestinian democracy, in exchange for, all the stuff that I was basically suggesting for a boss there. But you'd have to be doing it in a much more, I guess, covert sort of fashion, which does make it harder to do, and there's a lot more trust issues to sort of work out. But maybe there's an option for, then, at this point, if everything comes to pass, Hamas will disband, and sure, a lot of the people involved would, form this new organization, but this will be a purely political organization, and those that stick with Hamas proper, they are the rejects that were unable to see the grand plan or something. You could definitely sort of stake out a weird retooling, rebranding sort of thing there, but it's a lot more tricky to be coming up with the win for you guys. But yeah. So, I don't expect any of these three big players here to take my advice. However, as a U.S. citizen, I guess I do have technically a voice of my own to influence at least the fourth player in all this, the United States. And the United States should basically, my advice to my own government, to stop subsidizing this madness. Yeah, Israel gets a lot of money from the United States for its military defense. Let's hold that over to them and say, if you don't cut this crap out, if you don't figure out some way to solve this problem that doesn't involve mass murder, then all these subsidies are gone. And if you do try to mass murder people, they're gone. They're not only gone, but we're going to side with the other side. So, stop being awful and actually take any good opportunities that show up. And meanwhile, at the same time, the U.S. could also be like, hey, Palestinian Authority, if you could, figure out your crap so you're an actual functional organization that isn't beholden to people that just want to preserve their power, maybe, we'll, go to bat for you 100%, please. And actually follow through if they're able to pull that off, and then maybe we'll be able to get some stuff together. Maybe you could actually have fewer people dying, fewer people losing their homes, and yeah. But I'm just one random person on the internet, far away, who's fairly detached to the day-to-day. But I guess my heart still goes out for people that are getting screwed over because. Fools that are kings, who have no care for those who are under their control, only their own personal power. Yeah. So, I'm gonna probably end this here because this has been going on for a while. And I'm probably running out of B-roll. No, actually, I'm not running out of B-roll. I'm actually recording it after this. Fooled you! And there's a lot to unpack yet here. And I probably said something I didn't mean here, because this is a very complicated thing with a lot of moving parts, and my sort of streaming consciousness here, without a proper script. My first draft sucked. This one's hopefully better. Yeah. Oh yes, one more thing before I finish up here. Perfect Universe, I was able to be the ultimate arbiter of all things. I know I might be that on Twitter, but my authority doesn't much extend beyond that, I've noticed. That's disappointing, but probably for the best. But if for some reason I was in charge of settling the entire Israeli-Palestinian conflict myself, I'd lay down that, okay, we're going to go with a two-state solution. Palestine is going to exist. It's going to be a thing. Israel is going to exist. It's going to be a thing. No more, being awful to each other. Everyone gets demilitarized, including the Israeli police, because they seem to be pretty prone to shooting protesters, which kind of sucks. Jets, rockets, whatever. Everyone has to get rid of those ASAP. There is going to be maybe a outside defense force to prevent Syria or whatever from getting aggressive here for a span of time, and to handle Israel and Palestine's mutual security situation, so that their neighbors don't cause issues. And so that gets settled. The both governments are all, able to have a full democracy. Maybe offer up some specific suggestions for that, so that you don't have situations where there's effectively one party rule or suspended elections for a while. None of that nonsense anymore. And basically to help actually push everyone to having good democracy sort of stuff going on here. What more? So longer term, as far as security stuff goes, because outside buffer troops, whatever, being in charge there, isn't a good long-term solution. But to train up a new generation of folks that have little to no connection to the previous militant forces of these groups, and set them up in such a way that they are fully volunteer forces, so no more automatic drafts sort of things, because that's also kind of a bit fashy to me. And I know the reason people give for it in these situations, but I still don't drive with that. So you can so you'll have a fully volunteer military force for your national defense. It's going to also be limited, so it is only a defense force, no going aggressive here. So you got that going on. New people in charge, etc., etc. Fresh slate, complete turnover. What more? There's still going to be sticking points like Jerusalem. If both sides want Jerusalem, both sides get Jerusalem. You have to come to a mutual governing pact. If both of them want to have their capitals there, fine. They can be on the same block for all I care. To demand exclusive control here when it has been such a sticking point for so long is stupid. I don't like using that term very often, but it's the only term I got for this situation, other than outrageous and ridiculous, which seem woefully inadequate for describing the actual situation there. I didn't even get the whole talk much about Jerusalem proper there, and so make it a sort of shared zone where if there's going to be laws, rules, whatever that govern, that affect the city of Jerusalem specifically, they both have to agree on it, and so have some sort of joint council where they can come together and settle things there, and determine what rules, laws, whatever from either country are in effect over this territory. And if they can never come to an agreement there, then none of their laws are in effect there, and then they can deal with a happy lawless territory that is going to be bad for everyone, and then they can contain their animosity and nonsense to one specific part of the world. It'll suck for the people that live there, but well, it's better than having hundreds of thousands, millions of more people outside the city there suffering, and that's the best I can do there. Alternatively, they could both give up their claims there and let it be an externally governed zone where on one end, which is similar to what I just suggested, or have it be effectively a third state here that is a microstate for just the holy city, if you want to call it that, for instance, that is allows people from either bit of territory to come in, do whatever worship thing they need. The people that live there have already get to keep living there. No BS with trusts who got leases from the Ottoman Empire back a century ago nonsense. No nonsense like that. Everyone who lives in there presently gets to have the land that they're living on, or if they're in building their apartment, whatever. So just end rent, whatever. So what about the landlords? I don't care about the landlords. They're not contributing anything useful to here or in general, so whatever. That's my alternative option, and I'll give the parties involved a choice. Do you want to have joint control, actual joint control, or do you want it to be its own thing, and everyone can kind of come and go as they please, and it becomes a self-governing city that is, as part of its establishment, is explicitly open for everyone to get involved in, as far as peaceful coexisting and all that fun stuff. So that would be kind of my choice as far as things goes. And you might notice I just sideline all the powers that be, in this particular decision. Hamas, you got to disband. Israeli, military intelligence, all that also got to disband. Sorry, Palestinian Authority, but you're getting replaced with a new government. So Abbas, you're out too. So, whatever. So, could you just stop being crappy to each other? Also, the U.S., you get out of this as well. So that's my end day of the solution here, because there's been enough people dying for way too long. Let's stop that. Once again, hope you enjoyed. It's been DrIzixs playing some Minecraft while I talk about an ongoing tragedy that maybe it's about time stopped being so terrible. Yeah. Hope you guys having a better day than a lot of folks are. But I'm all kind of moody. Anyway, until next time, everybody. Toodles. Woohoo!